Okay, looks like we're up and running. Good morning and welcome back to debate series here at FII 9. In our final round, we turn to one of the most polarizing questions in AI today. Should powerful open source AI models, well actually should they be open source? Those capable of reasoning, generation, and replication, should they be banned to prevent catastrophic misuse? I think that is the topic today. The stakes are enormous. In 2025, McKinsey study found that open source AI contributed to 40% of global AI advancements, from faster drug discovery to climate modeling. Yet it was also linked to 25% of misuse incidents, totaling 1 trillion in economic damage. So the question is clear. Do we protect innovation by keeping it open or protect our society by locking it down? Joining me for this debate are Mark Minevich, President of Going Global Ventures, Nick Lines, co-founder and co-CEO of Flawless AI, and William Douglas, Chairman and CEO of Illusions. So let's get started. Maybe with the opening topic. I think we can kind of freestyle this one. Maybe start with Nick. What's your position in terms of should models be open or should they be locked down?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think important. I think the truth of the matter is it's about throttling. There's the grayscale here is grayscales upon grayscales. I think it's been talked about that that sovereign has to be open, and I completely agree with that. And creating those kind of open ecosystems and without a reliance on the big tech companies. However, the idea of banning something like an open source model, I don't think there's even a practicality that's even possible there. I think ultimately you're going to drive these things underground. I think there's even black market is perfectly capable of being able to handle these kind of models and basically providing them, and then you're in a completely different world. And we've seen that over history so many times where something's been banned because we're basically a little bit scared of it, and appropriately scared, because at the end of the day it's I think what we're dealing with is it's so many questions, and I think very much a question in AI is that what's the risk reward, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think when we're humans, we're continuously making that. Every single day we're walking on here, and you're going to risk reward, etc.
That's right.
And I think we're working in the artistic side of AI in the entertainment space, and we're continuously assessing, how far do we go? We chose to basically curate and buy all of our own data for our models, because in our world that was basically the sort of the right calculation from risk reward, etc. And it felt like the ethical thing to do to work with artists. I think in this respect, it's yeah, there is potentially a huge impact. I read the McKinsey report, and if I'm being perfectly honest with you, I'm a bit skeptical about basically the assessment of the true impact of open source on the kind of damage that we've been talking about. But I think finally, one of the things that seems to me, I'd love to know how much of that innovation using those open source came from industry, from a lot of people collaborating and spending money. Isn't it a case basically where we could have some kind of throttled release where basically we've got a refinement layer that's industry, where industry are bringing in experts?
Let's talk specifically about bans on open source AI. Can they be enforced or are they symbolic? Let's go to Mark for remarks.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much. Whoever made it to our session, kudos to you. And this is an open session. We're talking about open source. I stand firmly today against banning anything. You don't want to ban AI, new models, new creation, but especially open source, because banning open source will create chaos, complete chaos in the marketplace. And what we're after progress. We want innovation. We want transparency. The world could have banned internet, right? Internet was also open, even though DARPA, the United States DARPA was very involved in creation. But we didn't ban this. We didn't ban Linux. And so of course there's going to be some level of misuse. But bottom line is, We want trust and we want transparency. And as my colleague mentioned, I agree. In the world of sovereignty, of sovereign AI, you can't start building blocks of AI models with closed systems. You could only do it with open. So if we are going to ban it in one country, United States banned it, it doesn't mean China will ban it. It doesn't mean Korea will ban it. So we got to be all on open playing fields. I think that open source is so crucial for the world. One, for research and education. One, for governments. The governments could use it as a building block for sovereignty and sovereign AI. And the world is missing trust. It's missing transparency on AI. When you look at the products like Mistral, when you look at the products like Llama from Meta, you think Meta is a private global company, but they have open source systems. When you look at other companies that are employed, those are next generation models that researchers and intellectual property people, so we have a huge potential. We should not ban it, we should look forward to it, and we should contribute.
Thank you, Mark. Is there an argument, and we'll open this up to anyone, for arguing for restrictions or enforceable bans? I'm guessing, do you think there's an argument for the other side, William?
I think there's a middle point. So I don't think it's binary, one side or the other side. That's clear. It can't be banned. And that cow's already out of the barn in any event. But I do think when you contemplate the idea of innovation and open source and how AI is actually being adopted for large enterprises, there are restrictions. The limitations on data access alone serve as a huge restriction and a huge barrier to the whole open source development, right?
Yes.
So I think in reality, there are bans. I mean, when Aramco's Ventures is sitting in one of these labs saying, we realize we have 40 years of data and some of the best industrial data in the world.
Sure.
They're treating that as a proprietary asset.
Right.
And so there's, I think on the one hand, the open source is going to continue to be available. Whether or not it actually drives innovation as it's thought of remains to be seen. And there are other unforeseen barriers beyond government involvement that will impede that process.
So I just want to comment, if I could just interject for a minute. I think when you look at the study, well, my colleague says that open source doesn't, maybe not enough data. I think there is data coming from McKinsey that they're saying just on generative AI, an open source generative AI could contribute $4.4 trillion and they could block all sorts of barriers to capture growth. And also there is a study at Georgetown, a study that I wrote down, and that open source study basically says it does reduce entry-level costs, it does empower startups that don't have money to purchase or pay licenses, it helps universities, it helps developing countries. And by the way, even better proof, a CBI Insights, which is an analytics firm in New York, it covers the world, it's basically saying open systems, so open AI, not OpenAI, Sam Altman's company, different OpenAI, it's proof, 70 plus firms, startups, real startups that are growth oriented already, that have received funding, are proof of this secure ecosystem of open source AI. So we have proof there. Secrecy does not do it. Borrowing AI AI from closed systems does not make us safer. It makes us slower. So I argue that innovation, tremendous innovation, comes from open source.
Thank you, Mark. Nick, what do you think?
I think I completely agree with Mark as well. That, we're talking about this kind of open environment. We're talking about one of the things we've been talking a lot about in earlier sessions is, this whole idea of startup, in this whole idea of growth. There has to be an ecosystem to be able to support. Because the longer that we go on, the harder it is going to be for people to be able to get into the world of AI. Like data, if you want to, we had to take a route where we had spent many, many millions on buying our own data. There's not many people basically have the ability to do that. We had to do that outside of VC funding. And so I'd say that we were super anomalistic.
Yeah.
But the truth is that like, there's also a big question that I think, you can obviously lean towards the side of open, and that's sort of the utopian kind of, and what we all hope. And I think it's going to be a mix, of course, as basically things progress.
Sure.
But I think in both open and closed environments, you've still got the question of basically ownership of the data that's being used. It's not something that gets talked about a lot, but like coming from basically like AI and entertainment, like there is basically a lot of people's IP that is sitting in those existing data sets that is still yet to be decided who owns that. Like I think we take the position that the artists haven't sold their life's work just because they performed in one film, for example. And I think that those are kind of questions that have to also, it's not just about open or closed. It's like, what data is basically both of those kind of models using?
Yeah. There are those that argue that certain data sets, like you were saying, proprietary, do allow for certain types of capabilities that allow deeper learning. And there's some sovereigns that actually feel that way too, and they want to protect their models in that regard.
Yeah.
I'm on the other side in terms of openness, but maybe...
Well, most sovereigns feel that way.
That's right.
And it is a utopian view that we're going to drive this massive innovation because and only because it's open source, when the data barrier is very, very real. And I wouldn't debate.
Okay, that's a bonus point, came in. Bonus point.
But I wouldn't debate its benefit to academia or benefit to society. I wouldn't debate that at all. But it's really about how much more quickly the innovation can occur, and how close are we to those barriers today. And I think we're closer than we think. And the data barrier is very real. And the more AI proliferates, the more people see value in their data.
Yeah.
And the harder that data is to get to.
Right.
Yeah, and I want to say, if I can, Bill mentioned this, I do think that this whole topic today is about safeguarding. Whether we're safeguarding closed systems or open systems, transparency is so required. How could you invest in the country, for example? How could you invest in any company when it's not transparent? So what open source systems allow you to do is they allow you to do public auditing. And it's so crucial. Public auditing is so crucial because there you understand biases, or the lack of biases. You understand vulnerabilities. You understand malicious intentions. And they're all detected early. So I believe the studies that are being done by Stanford, by World Economic Forum and others, that transparency is the biggest safeguard that we have, whether it's open or closed, as you mentioned. And right now I see closed models have caused more harm to the real world because they have biases that are hidden. We don't know those biases. Decision-making process is hidden. At least on open source, we know the decisions. We have a little bit of explainability, and we could uncover those biases. So for me, the biggest safeguard is transparency.
So is enforcement a policy illusion, or can we actually contain runaway code in a boundless digital world? Let's move our focus on to, do bans hurt innovation more than they harm? And I think we do know that there's a strong opinion here. But I think the big question really is around how do we actually contain it? So maybe Nick, how can we contain harmful?
I think containing it, I think, I don't think it's possible to sort of fundamentally contain. I think it's not a black and white situation where you can say, okay, tomorrow basically we're not going to have these models. But I think there's Mark mentioned Meta, actually, I think is a really good example of basically, it's mostly open, right? In that basically they're creating the ecosystem in the same way that Sovereign can basically have a mostly open environment and can give enough power to people to create their own, with their own products or their own services and whatever else they want to discover, innovation, etc. I said, but I think the thing is one of the throttles seems to be, to me, to be investment, because you can't just take one of these models and just turn up to it and just invent the cure for cancer. right?
Yeah.
You know, there's the reality, and there's a sliding spectrum. Like, you know, you can create potentially IP that might be worth a lot of money, but like, you know, but when a lot of the innovation that's talked about in the McKinsey report, I think
Yes.
what we're talking about is industry having to invest a lot of money over a period of time with a lot of people. And I think to some degree, if you could limit the access, just throttling certain access, that basically means that the recreational user, inverted commas, or the sort of malign user isn't basically able to have quite the access to be able to cause. And that's, again, it's not an exact solution, but there are mechanisms in that grey area where possibly basically certain restrictions could be applied.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I gotta say, this question is a very important question that you just raised. How could you pause a block and put all the safeguards, whether it's open source or closed? I think the bottom line is it's not prudent. It's just not smart to do it. I've seen scientists, the leading scientists in the world, signing papers and saying, let's pause all the research for AGI, for example. That's a foolish step. If this is being done in France, that means the United States is going to get ahead. China is going to get ahead. Saudi Arabia is going to get. So you really can't do this. And again, I want to emphasize this again. Open source is national strategic imperative for every country. And you cannot put pause on national strategic imperative by any measure, because we don't want to necessarily have foreign entities or large multinationals or leading what we call Magnificent Seven, okay, and I'm part from that region. We don't want them to be, we don't want to come in from single vendor technology and saying this is a solution, especially governments. The governments, not only they have to verify, they have to trust, and they have to trust on both sides. And the trust is because open source potentially will be used in defense, in energy, in infrastructure, in medical, in healthcare. It's really important. So I think from sovereignty point of view, again, we cannot cede innovation and leadership right now. So no pausing. I think safeguards, misleading. I think transparency is the biggest one. That's my answer.
Thank you. William, the promise of open source models in terms of breakthroughs for medical and climate seem to be really palpable. What are the risks of delays in that from the types of things that we've just been discussing? Holding back, not allowing things to be...
Well, I mean, if you take, just in the first instance, take medical in the United States, those records are not readily available to all the potential companies that could use them to innovate with AI. And the idea that we're going to be in this open source world where everyone has access to everything, it's just not reality. Yeah. And I don't believe it ever will be reality. I think whoever gets to they have a meaningful edge, whatever the vertical market is, it's going to stay closed. It's going to get commercialized. We're seeing that already. There's other walls that are being built around this. So you look at the hyperscalers. Why are we in a tool market today? Why do they market tools? Why do they only talk about agents? And I'll tell you very simply, it serves their commercial environment. And
Sure.
I don't think those are sustainable edges. I don't think a lot of those tools are being implemented. I think companies that invested heavily in data science and saw little, if any, returns are exiting those investments, and it's evolving. And you know, and don't get me wrong, Mark, I believe in open source, big time. I believe in the utopian ideal of open source. There's a practical reality to whether or not it can be achieved, and that's kind of where it gets tough for me.
Bill, so I agree with you. I think in some situations, you need closed systems, especially when you need quality assurance, you need support from global brands that will support you in case of any crisis management. But also, we have to allow the world, the emerging economies that are emerging, to be part of the story. You know, if we constantly say, oh, it's complex, you know, we don't know how we could let this data out or put everything out, I think lots of countries around the world are going to be laggards. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to open the playing field. And at the same time, we think that innovation could come from both. It could come from closed but most important thing that I just want to mention is if we go only on closed systems and we disregard and remove the open source, the world will be full of biases, and biases is not responsible AI. We're all for responsible AI.
Thank you, Mark. We can see the core divide here, whether openness is good for our public or it's a public hazard. Round 3 is gated around the release and the compromise between safety and progress. Our final round asks, if bans are too crude, can gated release, tiered access, auditing, and licensing balance safety and progress? Nick, why don't we go to you to hear your thoughts first?
Yeah, I think that was really the point that I was making in the last round, which is, I think that, having this ability to be able to understand basically who's going to be using it, how they might be using it, understand how we can gate it possibly and tier it possibly. Again, there is no exacts here, and I think that it's back to what Mark says. The transparency that's important here is it is absolutely vital. We do need basically open and closed. We do need those ecosystems to sit alongside each other. There needs to be, just like with any healthy natural ecosystem, there needs to be basically a number of living organisms within any particular ecosystem. Right? It's the same with these models.
Yes.
And I think that the truth is, I think that's the challenge, is basically understanding the actual environment properly, understanding how to potentially try to gate it. There is going to be basically leakage, that's a fact, but it's also, again, back to, how much you want to throttle that, basically, that progress against that risk. And I think that, the truth of the matter is that, I think we can throttle pretty hard on progress and mitigate quite a lot of the risk.
Why don't you touch on the ethical safeguards that are at play here as well? What are your thoughts there in terms of how
the responsible AI and
yes.
ethics,
yeah, okay. So, I can only really, from my perspective, very specifically coming from, like I've said, from the art side of AI,
yes.
We're working with artists, providing artists tools to create and to basically, ultimately in film, to be able to hugely reduce production costs.
With regards to copyright, that debate goes
100%,
on. Yes.
right? And so right from day one, we were of the opinion, well, hold on, my business partner's a film director. I wrote a script to get into actually this thing. After being in technology, I wrote a script. So I'm passionate about this whole world. And we were like, well, hold on a minute. We're not going to be able to steal the art from our customers, then put them into a model and then somehow regenerate and pass that back via tooling and say, well, we've now stolen from you, but we'd now like you to basically pay. So from our perspective, that's important. I think what people aren't identifying is that in so-called ownership of data, there was never conceived deeper rights. And so, for example, just in a film, for example, just to finish, you've basically got the biggest investment that has ever been made in film by the studios, but the biggest investment that's ever been made by the artists in those films, as the biggest creative contribution was made by the artists. They don't fundamentally apparently own any of those data sets.
Right.
I think that's a big question that's going to be starting to unfold in the next couple of years.
Mark, to counter that, I think continuing the argument for open access, why don't you share your thoughts there?
Well, I think that actually, to be honest, close to open, you mentioned you posed a question regarding ethics. It's very important, but I think you got to build, whether it's open or closed, you got to build with certain values. And I think it's very important to build with, there are two worlds right now in AI. There's really two worlds. It's the world of the United States and what we're doing with the open stack that we're providing to the rest of the world. And there's a world that is coming from China, even though I think it's a fantastic set of technologies, but it has a set of different values. And I think that in open source, it all becomes very clear. I think we have to focus on building it on democratic values that are explainable, that are fair, and are very transparent. And all of those factors, explainability, transparency, fairness, democratic values, are critical for us to build proper open models. And that's much more than responsible AI. I think also open models will allow you to do more to help to make sure that we are aligning the models, the next generation models, with human-centric design. Human-centric design is really critical because in closed models, like in Sam Altman's world with OpenAI, you really don't know what kind of things are going to come up, which will not necessarily help humanity. In open source, I think you have a clear understanding how it's aligned with human set values of what together with the United Nations, I defined something called planetary AI. I think it will help the planet. Open source will help the planet a lot more. But bottom line is we need fairness. We need to make sure that it's democratically and good values and explainable. And if those key things are there from open source or closed, we're in good shape. If they're not there, we're going to collapse.
Thank you, Mark. I like the idea of planetary AI and the human-centric approach. William, what are your thoughts on the ethical side and gatekeeping and even some of the things that Mark's talking about with regards to...
Look, I think there's a compelling argument for safeguards, but how would you implement them? How would you enforce them? So I think it's in large part hypothetical. I love the world Mark describes. I just don't see things rolling out that way. The idea of transparency in the models alone. I mean, you're actually talking about the essence of open versus closed, right? And I believe you're going to see a greater evolution in closed because I don't think the dream of innovation that was wrapped around open, at least in the sectors that I'm involved in, is occurring. Certainly not the way McKinsey or Accenture or others pitched it. So, but I love Mark's view of the world, I believe in it. I believe in it. I just...
No, I support your view also. I think there's a room for both open and closed.
Yeah.
There's room for both.
Yeah, there's a balance there. Any thoughts on that in terms of how you might enforce that?
I think
We might need a creative side to take a look at it.
Yeah, I just don't think that. I just agree with what Bill and what Mark is saying is that I don't think there's an enforceable mechanic here.
Yeah.
I think that the truth is. I think we're also somewhat protected in that. I think a lot of innovation will come from the closed environment where there's basically a lot of funding, etc. There is entirely need for the open, for that transparency. I love the idea of the planetary, human-centric as well.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily too utopian, but I think that that we seem to be going in the direction of verticalization. That basically, industry specialists that are sitting alongside a lot of these large models, which fits perfectly within the open and the closed environment.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be a lot of innovation will sit where a lot of the money gets invested, which I think will still be a lot in the private world. So
right.
I think that so to some degree that there's some hedging basically there.
I am very concerned just to that point. I'm very concerned in the world right now that the closed models, the ones that we see right now, OpenAI, but not only OpenAI, are not necessarily aligned with human-centric version of AI that we are intending for humanity. There are lots of things there that we don't understand, we can't control because they're closed, and it doesn't really support the human-centric model.
Yeah.
At least a company like Anthropic, again, I'm not picking on them, even though maybe not completely open or closed, I think it's a hybrid. They designed something called constitutional AI, saying that we're going to put safeguards on what you can or cannot do in our platform. I think that's important. If we're going to do closed models, we at least have to put some sort of a constitution of what's possible and not. Otherwise, this is going to be also complete chaos.
Quick comment.
Yeah, just very quick comment is that basically I literally couldn't agree more with Mark in that respect. If we have a couple of individuals with these super powerful models, I do not trust what they're going to do.
And that brings us to the central question of this session, not how to stop AI, but how to guide it safely. I think we've got an audience poll here. There's a QR code that we can pop up here in a moment. And if you can reach into your smartphones and pull up this QR code and vote on the question today is, should powerful open source AI models without safeguards be banned to prevent catastrophic misuse? Take a moment to cast your votes right now, if you will. We'll display the results shortly as we move on to our closing reflections.
Yes.
We've got closers for 3 minutes. Each speaker will get 30 seconds. Maybe we'll do a minute, actually, because it's such a great conversation that we're having up here. What would you make? What would make you change your mind if you have a certain position right now on the open source and openness of AI versus control?
I think that's probably...
Start there. What would make you change your mind, Nick?
And that's one of the questions. I think that I think we have to be very careful about changing our mind. I think what we've talked about up here is the fundamentals. And I think we're going to have a bit of a bumpy road with certain things. The media is going to make a big song and dance about some things that happen and not necessarily about all the benefits that are happening. And I think we need to basically take more of the average of basically what is the opinion, at least I believe, that's been represented on this stage, and have some like steadfastness around that. Because when something does happen and when there's a big song and dance made about it, is that there is a risk that basically we start basically deviating from basically the sort of the more overarching course. So I'd say that basically that's my advice, would be let's be ready for basically where there is going to be some things, because we're going to go through a lot of positives and some probably negatives. Let's not basically necessarily lose the course that we think is the right one because of anomalistic situations.
Mark, what are your thoughts there?
So I just want to
Sorry.
close this very quickly. I think history is on the side of openness always. We didn't secure internet by banning open protocols. We didn't secure banking by banning encryption or cryptography. We're not going to secure AI by banning anything. The answer isn't fear. I think it's collective responsibility, but it's collective responsibility within your enterprise and within your government. Don't look for international institutions like United Nations to solve anything. They cannot. I think it's just collective transparency of people. We need transparency. We need audits. We need to make sure that it's shared between all of us. And I think if we ban open source AI, we're going to ban participation by the people, by the common people, and we can't do that. Then it's going to get even worse, because the AI will be in the hands of few corporations, in few governments, and nobody will have a chance, and that's a catastrophe. So we want safer world, we want accountable world, we want free, and we want that for our AI. AI now represents the big chunk of the global economy, and we want to make sure it is safe, it is accountable, it is free. Because if it's one more thing which is dangerous than open AI or open source AI is the world where only few control that. And we don't want that world where few control it. We want to spread it out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really difficult to change your mind on this. Let's give you 2 minutes, William, to state your position.
I have to be honest with you. There's not much that I can add to this conversation at this point. What I would finish on is AI for the good of people is what we should all be working on. I think the more that's heard, the more effort we all put into it, the more likelihood that we'll get there. And the open source, closed source, I mean, that's really not an argument anymore. We are in an open source world, right? How it evolves from here remains to be seen. And I think the open source models they're less useful than many of the closed source models, but we'll see what happens. In any event, I enjoyed it. Thank you both.
3 rounds, 1 question that just won't go away. And yeah, I think we're formulating an opinion on it just right now in terms of what's actually going to stay and what's going to go. We'd love to turn to the audience. Can you get your final votes in for where you feel you might stay on this position?
I apologize greatly. I got to run to another session, but it was great to be here, and thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Look at this poll here. So we're looking at.
Wow.
Yeah, no, keep them open.
Keep them open. Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Great work, moderator. Great work. I really enjoyed it.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
So thank you again for Mark. We've got William and Nick. Appreciate all of you and all your insightful thoughts this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.